Hey guys, it's Leone. Welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 5 books of 2020. 2020 was a great year reading wise. I got to read 91 books more or less this year, and out of those, very few were actually bad. So I'm really lucky to have read that many books this year, and I feel really excited to be doing this. Now, picking top 5 out of that many books were actually pretty, hard, but was not that hard either, I guess. I mean, the books that I'm going to talk about today are the ones that really touched me in a way that I think they will remain on my top spot for the rest of my life and not just this year. So it was pretty easy picking them out, but I still felt really bad leaving out the other books that I thought was really good. So I decided to start with the first few honorable mentions. So the books that I'm going to start talking about right now are books that were not exactly in my top 5, not really, but were good enough to be in there. So if had I not read one of the books in my top 5, I'm pretty sure these would have taken that place. So I'll start with the first honorable mention, which is none other than Matilda by Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl is a magician. He was so amazing, and his books were so good. I mean, no wonder it's a children's classic. It's like every single book he's ever written, I feel like, is amazing. Not that I've read all of them, I haven't actually, but reading Matilda, I think I was really young when I first read Matilda, and after all these years reading it again, it felt so good. Matilda is hands down an amazing book. The next one that I read the next one that is on my honorable mentions list is Animal Farm by George Orwell. I don't think I need to talk about this much. Everybody knows how good the book really is. It's a satirical book, and the take on politics and government as a whole, I felt it was just so profound, and the way it was written. I listened to the audiobook, which was, by the way, really amazing. I actually do not remember who the narrator of this version of the audiobook was, because I think the book Animal Farm has been narrated over decades by different people. So I think the one I listened to, I found it on Audible, so it's probably there, but I'm not sure which one it was, but it was really amazing. I really loved that narration, and it was listening to it. It's a really short book, so I could listen to it in I think it took me a few hours only, but it was so great. The next book on my list is Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. I need to talk about this book a lot. I really tried to keep it on my top 5, but I actually could not, because I have a lot of other books that I really loved so much to put in there. But Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson is an outstanding book. This is a story of this woman named Lillian who gets a phone call from her college best friend called Meredith. Meredith and Lillian have not been in touch for a while, ever since something happened in college. And when Lillian gets a call from Meredith to help her out, she accepts the offer. She goes to Meredith's house. Meredith is really rich, and she is the wife of this senator who might run for president in a few years, and she has a problem. And the problem is her husband's children from his previous marriage catch on fire. They literally catch on fire. So now Lillian is asked to babysit these 10-year-old twins who, whenever they get scared or angry, feel any sort of immense force of emotion or anything, they catch on fire. Like, they start burning. And Lillian does not know what happens, so Meredith just tells her that these children are a little special, that they need special care. She needs to be a little bit more aware of what she's doing around these children. And Lillian's like, okay, they're still children. But when she goes to meet these children, she realizes, oh, so there's the catch, because they literally catch on fire. At first, I thought it was a ridiculous idea, the book, like, okay, what's happening? But as it proceeded, I realized the book is so profound, the way it's sort of magical, the way the bond forms between Lillian and the two children the way that it was shown, I felt like it was so lovely. This whole relationship, the bonding that was happening throughout this entire book. And it's not exactly boring in any sense. It was a great book. I really enjoyed it. And especially, I listened to the audiobook again. I mean, I'm realizing right now that a lot of these books on my list are audiobooks. I've listened to a lot of audiobooks this year, which this was the first time, well, not this year, 2020, because by the time I'll be posting this, it will already be 2021. But I listened to a lot of audiobooks in 2020, and it was the first year that I actually started listening to audiobooks, and I realized how much I love audiobooks. They're so amazing. So, Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. This audiobook is narrated by Maureen Ireland. She's one of my most favorite narrators, I think, because there are 2 books that were narrated by her in this list already, and this is the first one. The other one is, you'll see what the other one is. But basically, I think it was so amazing. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook, but I'm pretty sure the physical book or the ebook would be equally amazing too. The next honorable mention on my list is A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. A Torch Against the Night is the second book in the Ember in the Ashes series. And Ember in the Ashes, I think the series is really amazing. I have been hearing about it for like ages until this point. And then last year I finally decided to pick it up because it was all on a whim, really. I was not really like interested in picking it up at that time. I just happened to have the books with me, and I was like, okay, let's start. So I started reading An Ember in the Ashes, and Ember in the Ashes was okay, but when I read Torch Against the Night, I just knew that it was so good. I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of the series. I've been procrastinating a lot with that series, and I haven't been able to finish the other 2 books. The 4th and final book on the series that just came out last month on December 1st, and I'm just so excited to read it. Sabaa Tahir is an excellent author, and she herself has been saying that A Sky Beyond the Storm, the last book in the series, is probably her favorite, and that just makes me scared and makes me want to read the book as well at the same time. But yes, so A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. Really looking forward to finishing the series. The rest of the series, I am certain, is going to be just as amazing as the first 2. But yes, the last honorable mention in this list is The Book of Lost Names by Christine Harmel. This is a World War II historical fiction about a girl named Eva Traub, and she's a Jewish girl living in occupied France, and it's all about how she escapes that occupied zone to go to this less occupied zone. Basically, it's still this city near Vichy, which is called Orignan. She goes there, she runs away, and she starts forging passports and identification for children in there to help them move out of occupied France into Switzerland. I felt like it was a really profound story, what she was doing right there. The characters were really deep, and the characters were actually pretty beautiful. But on top of that, the love story that Eva has with this other character called Remy, I enjoyed it so much. I personally thought it was a really good book, and it came out last year. I read it right after it was released, and it was one of the few new releases that I'd read right after it came out, because it just interested me, and I thought, okay, why not give it a go? And I have not been disappointed. It was so nice to read. Time for me to start talking about the top 5. Yes, we're here. So I'm going to talk about my top 5, and I'm going to start with the 5th best book I read this year. So it's actually a poetry collection. It's the book No Matter the Wreckage by Sarah Kay. No Matter the Wreckage is Sarah Kay's collection of poetry that she has written over the years and was published, I think, in 2014. One of my best friends have actually been telling me to read this book for so long, but I just kept putting it aside, because I thought it's it's poetry, it's not really for me. But then after reading it this year, I realized how much I actually admire poetry too. Like, it's not something that I cannot understand or not read. It's just, you have to feel it sometimes. So ever since then, I think I've read like at least 20 poetry books, which is still quite amazing. But nothing really beat No Matter the Wreckage by Sarah Kay, because I felt like there was this connection I could feel with this book. And honestly, it is so amazing, and I highly, highly recommend checking this book out. The next one, the fourth book in my top five best books of 2020, is actually a memoir, and it is Born a Crime: Stories from South African Childhood by Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah, I really love the guy. He's a great comedian. I've actually enjoyed watching his comedy and The Daily Show for quite some time now. But it was a little bit, I don't know how it happened really, but I was stupid enough to not have realized that he might actually have a memoir or a book. I didn't know it, and when I found that out this year, I found out he has a book that he published in 2015, I think. And I was like, where have I been living? How did I not know it? And then I figured out that he actually narrated the audiobook himself, and that I just could not stop. I found the book instantly and I listened to it, and I loved it so much. The way that he narrates the story, the way that he shares his life with the rest of us, the fun and also the truth behind it. It was sort of kind of relatable as well. And his mother, the struggles that she faced, the way that she led her life as a whole. What I really loved about Trevor Noah was that he put his life lessons, the truth, and the harsh bits of his stories together with the humor, and then he sort of wrapped it all around and formed a little sushi ball, which it's just so good. Like, honestly, it was so profound. And the way he narrates the story in the audiobook, I mean, he's already amazing, but when he's sharing his story, you feel like you're sitting there with him right in front of you, and he's just telling you a story, and you're like, oh, really, wow, and then you're laughing along to it. I thought it was really amazing. And I think he tried his best to show the things that were going on in South Africa during the time of apartheid, but also share how even in those situations his childhood was not the worst that it could have possibly been. But yes, that's my fourth best book of 2020. Now coming down to the third one. So the third book in this list is actually one of the last few books that I read last year. I keep saying this year. Last year in 2020, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Oh my god, was it beautiful? It had me sobbing. Like, this book is, T.J. Klune's writing style, first of all, is beautiful. It's mesmerizing. If you start reading, you won't be able to stop it. At least that was the case with me. I could not stop reading once I started reading it, because he is just so good. And on top of that, the story itself was just unbelievably beautiful. It's got everything. It's got fun and love and kindness and a little bit of melancholy. It's so beautiful. So The House in the Cerulean Sea is basically the story about this fantasy world where there is a fantasy island called the Marsyas Island. And in that island, there is a orphanage, the Marsyas Orphanage, which is run by this special master. And then there are 6 special children in that island. Now, these children are not exactly all human. They're like different magical creatures, and basically potentially dangerous children, and they're special. They're all children, and they're all taken care of by the master of this orphanage. So our main character, Linus Baker, works for the ministry in the department in charge of magical use called dichomy. So one day when his seniors from the extremely upper management call him up and tell him that he has to go on a casework, because Linus is a caseworker. He has to go on a trip to the Marsyas Island to check out if the orphanage is being run soundly and safely, and if the kids in there are in a safe position. Linus Baker is sent to Marshall's Island then. And the story really starts there. It's basically about the month that Linus spends with these 6 kids. I'm not going to tell you guys what the kids are because it was a real shock for me when I first read that part. It was like, okay, wow. But the story as it follows, it talks about a lot of serious issues that we need to acknowledge, and I thought it was beautiful. And I've seen TJ Klune mention that how the story is basically about kindness and love. I think that is so true. At the end of the day, the whole story is about kindness and the bond that Linus forms with the people living in the orphanage. And even though the orphanage was treated as an outcast by the rest of the world, he really embraces the place, and it teaches him a life lesson that he otherwise would never have learned ever. It's a complete, like, the book is so profound. It's so beautiful. I mean, I suggest, if you haven't read it yet, go ahead and read it, because you're never gonna find any other book that's as beautiful as The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Okay, now the second book in my list is it's Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, and it was translated to English by Neil Smith. Oh my god. This was a ride. At the beginning, okay, by the way, I also listened to this on audiobook, and this is the other book that I was talking about earlier that was narrated by Maureen Ireland. This was so amazing. I don't know if any other narrator could have done it as well as she did, but it was so beautiful. It was so amazing to listen to. But because I was listening to the audiobook at the beginning, I was super confused about what was happening. But once the story picked up, once I really understood what was happening, I don't think I was like laughing and sort of sobbing at the same time. It was that beautiful. Anxious People is the story of this bank robbery gone wrong that turns into a hostage situation. So we have this bank robber who tries to rob a bank, but turns out things get a little bit messy. So what the bank robber does, is that they decide to, instead of like getting out of the bank, they decide to run upstairs on that same building and go to that, like, the topmost floor and take some hostages. Now the topmost floor was actually an empty apartment, so there was like there was a real estate agent, and there were some people visiting the apartment. Like they were looking for the apartment. There were like a lot of prospective buyers, and then there was the real estate agent, and in between that, on top of that, the bank robber comes in and they just point the gun at everybody, and they're like, "You're hostages. I'm taking hostages." It's a really messy story, because there were like 9 characters overall, and then there's a bank robber, then there are the cops. You get to read bits like from almost everyone's perspective, sort of. It's just, at the beginning I was super confused, like what the hell is happening? But once the story really settles in together, and I really started to understand which characters and what was going on, I started to believe that was the best book I read this year. It's like, I think if I would have made it the best one. Like, I think it lost by a 0.1 margin, because I would rate this book a 50 stars if I could, out of 5 stars. It's so good. I've been recommending this book to everybody. I'm making my best friend read it finally. She's like, "I don't understand what's happening." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. It's sort of confusing at the beginning, but once you get into the story, it is just amazing. It's so good." And now, last but not the least, the final book and my number 1 book of 2020. I think this should be an easy guess, but like, it is none other than Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I adore this book. I don't have words to explain how much I love this book. I read this book twice last year, and 2020 was, I think, made better just by the existence of that book in my life. I love it so much. Daisy Jones and the Six is this oral retelling. It's a historical fiction. It's an oral retelling of this band called Daisy Jones and the Six, how they got together, how they rose to like fame. Why was I saying power? And like what was behind their fame and how ultimately the band broke apart. It had a lot of Fleetwood Mac-esque vibe and also a bit of Beatles vibe to it. I just really, really adored it. What I loved the most about the book was the complicated characters in it. A lot of people say that you don't really get to learn anything about the character because it's an oral retelling, so it's just a bunch of people sitting there telling their stories. But the best thing even about that is the fact that it was made so realistically, the way they were sharing their stories. Not everyone, there were like 6 7 people in there sharing the same story, but from different perspectives. So the story as it happened were told differently by each of the characters. It was mind blowing. It was so good. And on top of that, like the way that it was set, like it was set in the early 60s, and early 70s. It was between 60s and 70s. So basically Daisy Jones and the Six happens in the late 60s. And the way they're recording songs, they're doing Rolling Stone articles, like, you know, interviews and everything. They're shooting for the album cover. Everything was just so believable and so beautiful. The way, and Sunset Strip, the way Taylor Jenkins Reid described the whole scene as a whole, it's the best book ever. Okay, ever. I'm gonna cry. And I listened to the audiobook. I actually read the book as well, but I've listened to the audiobook twice. It's so good. The audiobook is actually a full cast, which makes it only better. So it's narrated by several different characters, and all of the characters that were present in the book, actually. It's just amazing. The audiobook, I feel like it's so good. And Daisy Jones and the Six is also being made into this mini series, and I cannot wait to watch it. Reese Witherspoon is in production for that, I think. So it's like, I'm just so excited for it. It's my most favorite book ever. I'm just so glad I read the book. And yeah, basically. So that was all. That's my top 5 best books of 2020 and other honorable mentions. I hope you guys liked it, and let me know in the comment section below what you guys thought were your top 5 and what you guys think about my top 5. So see you later.